All right. Got my whiteboard cleaned off. I found the Windex. That's all set to go. Waiting on our dinner from Grubhub, but guys, like, really late already. Not that well. Let's just get another video done while we're waiting. COVID lecture. Last week was about the financial crisis. This week is COVID, and let me just tell you real quick what those dates are. Yeah, here we go. This is from the book, and my summary page here with all the, here we go, all the cycles on it. Now, bear in mind that in the book, if I call something the COVID cycle, COVID's what happened at the end of this. So most of this is actually about an economic expansion that took place. And then the very end, and a really, really bad economic expansion. You may remember me from the last video saying that the economic expansion we had in the 90s was not only extremely long, it was also pretty strong. This one here is going to be a really crappy economic expansion, and I want to talk about that in particular. This cycle is going to go from, I was right. Remember on the video earlier, I was trying to remember when the recession ended from the COVID recession, from the financial crisis. I think it was July 2009. That's right. Because the one right after the financial crisis is the COVID one. And so look at that beautiful whiteboard. July 2009 is the start of the COVID cycle, the one that's going to end with COVID. And the expansion is going to go to February of 2020. And then the recession part is going to be from March of 2020 to April of 2020. You may remember me mentioning in one of the earlier videos that even though the recession that we had in COVID was a really deep recession and a big jump in unemployment, it didn't last very long. We very quickly intervened in the economy and tried to pull it out. So we got a couple of topics going on here. One of them is going to be, I'm going to explain everything that happened in this period right here. Pardon me, I'm sorry. But also with a special focus on inflation. You've got two readings this time. One from some other jokers, Brooks, Orzag, and Murdoch from 2024, August 15, 2024. And then after that, we've got my chapter on the COVID recession. And so let's just go ahead and start and jump in here. And one of the things that they're going to talk about here in the first article, I'm going to do them, in some ways it might make more sense to do my chapter first because the reading is actually just about the inflation from COVID. But I don't want to do it that way if that's okay. I want to start with the shorter piece, the one that's going to be easier for you to follow. So we'll go ahead and start with that. You know what? In the process of doing this, I changed my mind. This often happens in lecturing. I'll sit there and spend hours trying to figure out how exactly I want to do something the next day. And then when I get around to it, I was like, no, let's do it a little differently. Let's start with a chapter. Let's start with a chapter from the book. Now, by the way, on both of these, everything is quiz possible, all right? They're neither of them real long or complicated, so it's not a big deal. So we'll start in July 2009, which is just absolutely perfect because that's right after what I talked about last week, which was the financial crisis. This is when the recession from the financial crisis is finally over. Unemployment's still pretty high at this point in July 2009, but we do have a long expansion here, and this is probably the weakest expansion since World War II. And I will tell you that the big problem was that under Obama, once they had done the big fiscal stimulus plan that they had, the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act of 2009. Okay, so the big discretionary fiscal stimulus that they did. Oh, I'm sorry, I had one of my lights off. That they put into play in February of 2009, they spent a ton of money. They really opened up the spigot over the top of the bucket with government spending. And it really, really helped. But once that was done, Obama was very reluctant to continue opening up the faucet. And so that's one of the big reasons why this was such a weak expansion, probably the weakest since World War II. Now, on the other hand, I'm going to explain to you here as we get into it. Once Trump came into office, that was no longer a concern, and the economy did recover somewhat faster. Still pretty weak, but somewhat faster. So let's go. Now, I want to show you some data here. Right there. It's in the reading. Oops. And John, get your fingers off of there. There we go. All right. What this is showing is average rates of GDP growth in these various expansions. The expansion leading up to the Ike 1 recession, the Ike 2 recession. Notice those, just look at the GDP growth rates in that column to start with. And see how expansions used to be, how much growth there used to be up until the subprime expansion. And the worst of all, the COVID expansion, 2.29% rate of growth during the good part of that period, during the good part. Not during the recession, during the good part, all right? During the expansion that led up to the COVID crisis, GDP growth was 2.29. We used to call that a growth recession in the old days. It's like, well, we're growing, but really it sucks, so we might as well call it a recession. But look how different that is from what we were experiencing back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and really the last time we had a really strong expansion. And even look at in the 90s, what's called September 11th expansion there, that's that big economic expansion in the 90s. Even that was lower than the others. The economy has generally slowed down, all right, generally slowed down, which is not good news for you, is it? Now, why? Why? All right, well, a number of reasons, but one I'm going to focus on right here is, look under COVID. You see the C, I, G, and net X? That's how much each of those components of GDP, consumption, investment, government spending, and exports, that's how much they are contributing to the overall number. Like that 4.08 at the very top. How'd they get 4.08? Well, 2.58 of it came from consumption, 1.2 came from investment, 0.19 came from government spending, and 0.12 came from exports, all right? So look at what the government column does. Down here under the COVID expansion. Negative. Government spending was a net drag on economic activity. Even though the beginning of this COVID period, and remember, the COVID period means the one that ends with COVID, right? Even though at the beginning of it they had a massive economic expansion, things were so slow during the Obama administration that net government spending was a drag on the level of economic activity. So, let's see here. Yeah. That, the reduction in government spending was totally a policy choice. Other things happened because the economy changed. But the change in government spending was a policy choice. They decided not to spend as much money. Obama was worried about spending money. And yet, as we'll see in 2 weeks, there was absolutely no logical basis for that. He should not have been worried about that. That is something that is a bad legacy of his presidency. So, we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which I now remember the name of because I'm looking at it. And while it was undersized, it did help the U.S. recover faster than Europe did. In Europe, they were all about austerity the whole time. They're all about, the financial crisis was terrible. We should stop spending government money too. So they really shrank. Now, by the way, it was during this period a very famous paper was published. We'll talk about it here real quick. A couple of Harvard economists, Rogoff and Reinhardt, wrote a paper showing that high levels of government spending caused the economy to contract Just the opposite of what I've been telling you. That high levels of government spending led the economy to contract. And of course, this is one of the things that is influencing Obama and the Democrats and the Republicans, right? This paper, this famous paper. Gosh, you ought to look up sometime. Colbert, Stephen Colbert, who used to have that comedy show, The Colbert Report. And he talks about this very paper. And it is a hilarious video if you want to look that up and watch it. Look up Rogoff, Reinhart, and Colbert, and you might be able to find the video. I think it's proprietary, so it used to be easy to get to, and you might have to look for it now. Anyway, long story short on that paper, a kid at University of Massachusetts Amherst, which is a post-Keynesian department, by the way, my school thought, he had an assignment to do in his class, graduate student. He was supposed to take somebody else's paper that had already been written and plug their numbers in, and see if he could get the same result. It was in a statistics class. And so he emailed Rogoff and Reinhart, and they were kind enough to send him their data. So all he had to do was take it and plug it in, right? So he's got this Excel spreadsheet of their data. And his girlfriend is looking at it. And she's a PhD student as well, I think in anthropology. And she says, there's errors all over this spreadsheet. And a number of other things wrong with it. He fixes the spreadsheet, then reruns the study and finds out the exact opposite that Rogoff and Reinhart had discovered, i.e., they said, the more money the government spends, the slower the economy grows. He said, actually, you screwed up your data. And they actually did some very questionable things too. But he said, the result is actually the opposite. So this graduate student found errors in their data. And so this paper that had been mentioned by a number of policymakers as to why they thought we should cut back on government spending was shown to be fatally flawed. Fatally flawed, let's put it that way. But, even after this was corrected, it didn't really change this policy choice of causing the government to shrink over this period. The Republicans, of course, wanted to criticize Obama, and the Democrats were all fired up about the fact that at the end of the Clinton administration, there had been a government surplus. Government surpluses drain income from the private sector. They should have been pumping income into the private sector. So, once more, point I'm trying to make here, and that you'll see in the paper, is that negative 0.01 that the government contributed to economic growth was based on policy choices that were encouraged by the paper from Rogoff and Reinhart and by the Republicans and Democrats as well. All right. Now, yeah. There's another problem here. There's another problem. Okay, we can change policy, right? We can say, you know what? And as a matter of fact, you'll read in the paper that when Trump was spending money, government money, he spent more, and the economy did actually grow faster. So we can change that. Did you notice something else on here? Check this out. And why do I have it bent over like this? Because I have everything that's on the quiz I have in red. And there's some stuff in red right here, and I want you to see it. So I don't want you to know right away what's on the quiz. Let's see, John. How did you have this folded over? Okay, that'll work. I noticed something else, though. I was highlighting the government spending column. Notice the investment column, how much it contributed. It dropped down to 0.73 even in the period before the COVID cycle. The investment number has been dropping for a while. Not consistently. It's been up and down a little bit, but the investment number is way down. How much investment, which I have said earlier, is a major contributor to economic expansions. Investment has been slowing down as well. That's not a policy. That's not something the government can just suddenly, hey, let's spend more money. This is from private sector firms. This has been talked about a lot in mainstream economics as well as in my school of thought. There's a couple of reasons why they think this is true, and this is a much bigger problem than the fall in government spending. First of all, levels of competition have declined. There have been articles about this for years now. There's been way too much combination of firms, way too much merger. So that, I mean, the capitalism is supposed to be about competition, all right? Capitalism is supposed to be about the consumer. And the consumer benefits when the firms are competing with one another. But you have merger after merger after merger, and there's not nearly as much competition. And so neoclassical economists have argued that, well, part of the problem is there's just not as much competition as there used to be, so there's no incentive for me to, as a firm, invest in all kinds of new technology, and it doesn't mean I don't do it at all, but it's not at the rate that it used to be. And in addition, people have shifted towards trying to buck up the stock price rather than reinvest the money that our company earned into new physical capital, rather than spending the money on, let's say putting in some self-checkout lanes at our store. Instead, we're going to buy back some of our own stock to drive up the price so that our stockholders, and many of whom are the people who run our company, will benefit as well. So that's a real problem. Firms have less reason to innovate and expand, and pressure for dividends and stock buybacks are greater than that for capital expansion, and it leads to short-termism. Now, having said these bad things about the Obama administration, I will say that unemployment did fall from 10% to 5%. All right, so I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a pretty big deal. It fell from 10% to 5% under Obama. But something else you may have read about is that the labor force participation rate has been falling for a long time. In other words, you only count as unemployed if you're looking for a job and you can't find one. If you're not looking, then you don't count in the unemployment statistics. My parents are both retired. My wife is retired, although actually she is working, so she does take up a job. But if Melanie was retired and not looking for a job, doesn't show up in the unemployment statistics. And by the way, in order to count as employed, all you need is like an hour of paid work during the reference week. Employment does not mean, you have a 40-hour-a-week job with benefits. It just means you did something this week for some money. So the labor force participation rate between 2009 and 2017 went from 65.7. Oh no, my beautiful clean board. 65.7% to 62.8. So people were deciding, I'm not working. I'm not going to work. All right, I'm not even going to look for a job. The number of adults who were old enough to work but deciding not to work. I'm sorry. Let's do the easy way, because I would have to subtract this from 100. If everyone who was old enough to work, 16 and above, if all of them were trying to find work, even if they didn't find work, that number would be 100%. This means that only 65.7% of the people who are eligible to work were actually looking, which is fine. A bunch of them are retired and so forth or whatever. But that rate went way down. So here's my point. We can lower the unemployment rate really quickly by just having fewer people look for work, right? If you're not looking, then you don't count. You gotta have two people that don't have a job. This one's looking, they count towards unemployment. This one's not looking, they don't count. What if this one decides to stop looking? Psh, unemployment went away, all right, because they don't count anymore. When unemployment fell to 5%, I don't have the number here, dagnabbit. Anyway, this has been going on since 2000, because I did calculate at one point. It's in the chapter here. I'll try to look for it while I didn't. Well, how could I have not copied that down? Anyway, when it fell from 10% to 5%, if labor force participation had stayed as high as it was before, it would have been closer to like 11%. It would have been really bad the second time over here, right? So yes, unemployment came down. But a lot of the fall in unemployment was simply people deciding not to look for work anymore. And I'm gonna go into that in just a second. All right. I do have it right here, you moron. By January of 2017, unemployment rate in the U.S. was 4.7. Yeah, it should have been 8.9. If the same number of people were still looking, it should have been 8.9, which is not very good, all right? And in fact, if it had been at the high point of labor participation rates, then it would have been, the 11 I mentioned to you earlier, the 11.1. So, labor force participation rate did rebound somewhat under Trump, and then it collapsed again during COVID. Now, why are people not looking for jobs? This has been going on for about 20 years now. Why are more and more people deciding, I'm not even going to look for a job? About a third of it is simply baby boomers retiring. All right, so there's more older people now than there used to be. I'm going to be 65 by the time, no, I'll be 64 when our class starts. I'll be 65 about a week into our class. Almost as important, another third, almost as important, are people who are claiming disability. Now, are these, lazy people? Well, I'm sure there are some lazy people. There's always some lazy people. But actually, a lot of these are also baby boomers who are having health problems, right? So about 2/3 of the collapse in the labor force participation rate is simply the fact that people are older, right? And that's it. And yeah, you'll see a little bit more in the article or in the chapter. I won't say too much more about that. And one more thing about that. Yeah, the last most commonly cited factor is the fact that working age individuals are going to school instead of going to get jobs. All right, so if you're going to school, you are choosing not to look for work. Right, so you don't count in the unemployment statistics. All right, so all interesting things that happened during the lead up to COVID striking in that around February, actually, of 2020. All right. Let's see here. Unemployment fell to about 3.6 under Trump, and then we had a big recession. You know why we had a big recession? Because of COVID. It's not complicated. All right. So let me just read here these further observations at the end of the chapter. Once again, one of the lessons of the cycle regards the strength and utility of fiscal policy. Right? If Obama administration had continued, then we would have had a much stronger economy, but they didn't. They cut way back, and it was better under Trump, but it still wasn't back to what it used to be in the old days. Right? All right. That leads us right to here. Okay. Now, the article that I assigned, which I decided at the beginning of this video, maybe you should read that second. I was thinking read it first. No, read it second, because actually chronologically it's next. All right. In fact, what it's talking about is the 2022 inflation. All right. After COVID, you may remember very, very well that there's been a higher rate of inflation. This paper here is a highly complex statistical breakdown of why the inflation went up. Some people argued it was because of those checks we sent around to everybody in that summer of 2020. We just spent way too much money. That's what was going on. This article says, it broke it all down, and it says, there's not much evidence for that. Not much statistical evidence for that. Don't worry about all the statistical crap that goes on in this article. The big thing you're after are the basic lessons, and I'm going to cover all those basic lessons when I'm talking right here. Right? So let's see here. In the aftermath of COVID, inflation is at its highest rate since 1981, raising the possibility that economic stimulus, that all those checks we sent out, was a mistake, that caused the inflation. They're using brand new data to try to figure out exactly what happened. All right. And by the way, average inflation in 2022 reached 8%, which is the highest it had been since the early 80s after one of the oil shocks. And they draw two conclusions. First, the vast majority of the COVID-19 inflation surge is accounted for by supply-linked factors, especially a rise in company margins. Okay, company margins. They talk about margins throughout the whole book. What's a margin? Selling price minus cost. What they're talking about is firms raise their profits. Firms raise their profit rate. When they say margin, they mean the difference between what the firm sold the stuff at and what it cost them to make it. They said that went way up and it really didn't go back down again. Let's see here. Demand factors like labor market overheating, played virtually no role. This is what people who said the $1,200 checks caused the inflation, because it caused a big jump in demand, which caused labor market shortages, and that's what caused the inflation. They said we have no evidence of that in the statistics. And the second thing is that they say, and this was from August 2024, that these margins, these profits, had yet to go back to their pre-COVID levels. So, yeah, that the policy stimulus that they did, the $1,200 checks and so forth, it was aggressive. And there's a debate over whether or not it was too aggressive, but their data focusing on supply chain disruptions, and most notably how firms raised margins at the height of COVID-19. So do you remember used car prices skyrocketing during COVID because we couldn't get any new cars because we needed chips? So what they're saying is that firms, all of a sudden, because supplies ran short, they jacked up their profits, all right? Which, because there's a shortage. I'm not saying that firms are bad, but what they're saying is that, but actually when COVID was over, they didn't go back. Remember what I said earlier about there not being as much competition in the economy anymore? That's what happens when there's not as much competition. All right, so they go through a bunch of input, output prices and that. You don't really need to know any of that. I mean, it's interesting and all, and they're highlighting what they discovered, and they show delivery times, and they're really trying to make a really solid case for what they're saying. But again, margins, or that difference between selling price and cost, is by far the most important supply chain variable, and it crowds out anything related to what they call vacancies to unemployment. Vacancies to unemployment is their measure for how tight the labor market was. Well, that's it. I said everything you need to know for the quiz, all right? So read the article, make your notes and so forth. But, they talk about the Z factors and stuff like this. I'm glad they did. I'm glad you're getting a chance to see it, because you're seeing somebody that's really making sure they're not writing a blog from their mother's basement, and say, oh, this is what I think happened. No, this was a really serious economic study with lots of underlying evidence. And their underlying evidence says, no, the $1,200 checks did not cause terrible inflation. So therefore, we shouldn't worry about the government spending as Obama did. And then, in fact, the real problem was we don't have a lot of competition in the market anymore. And that is week number 9. And I believe I heard Grubhub show up just now. I believe I have a steak waiting in the other room. May the force be with you.